Hello and welcome everybody, this is Roland Hartmann for HeliumX.tv, and in this tutorial I will give you a basic introduction into the new Helium plugin. Helium is a new plugin that enables you to create 3D animations really easily and quickly inside After Effects. And I will just give you a basic overview how to use Helium, how to create a simple scene, how to import your own objects, and how this whole plugin works. So let's get started in After Effects. Okay, so first of all, let's create a new composition, and this will be my Helium composition. And I will add a new layer, call this Helium as well. And now I will show you how you can apply Helium effects. If you go to Effects and choose Helium, you see that we have a bunch of effects that we can apply to layers. But I would recommend that you just use this Add Helium Effects as a starting point, because this will open up this panel. And in this panel, you have access to all the possibilities that you have with Helium. So let's take a quick look what we have here. First of all, you have a models library, so you can use these included 3D models. Then you have some primitives that you can use. You have the option to turn paths into splines. So you have different profiles and different presets already here. You have quite a cool library of materials that you can use and apply to your 3D models. Then you have some procedural effects, which we will not cover in this basic tutorial. You have a tool set of all the available tools, so we will use a bunch of these in this tutorial. Then you have the option to create mirror surfaces like floors or walls. And you have the option to create terrain effects, and you can use height maps to create distortions or displacements, I should say, and create terrains. Then you have the option to create different sets of cloners, which is also really cool. And last but not least, you have the option to create a page scroll. And in this panel, you can access all of these things. So the first thing that I want to create in this tutorial is a primitive. So let's open up the primitives. In this case, I want to use a high sphere. There are two bunch of spheres here. So this is the standard sphere that has a little bit of a lower resolution, but I want to use one of the high ones because these have really smooth surfaces. So let's apply this and let's take a look at our timeline. You see that in the timeline, Helium automatically created a bunch of layers. So we have light, and this is actually just a standard point light. Then we have a standard After Effects camera, and we have a null. This null is linked to my 3D object. So I can use this null to move and rotate my scene in my 3D space here. On my Helium layer now, we have this sphere effect. And this is actually a primitive effect that is creating the 3D geometry. If you take a look here at this little warning that says that it will slow down your preview and export because it's not optimized for multi-frame rendering, you can really ignore that. That's a little bug of After Effects, and yeah, it won't slow down anything, so you can just use it and leave multi-frame rendering enabled. Now let's take a look on the options that we have. So the first and probably most important option here is the edit option. If you click this edit option, in the case of a primitive, you can add a material. If you use other objects, like for example text presets, you may have also the option to apply animation. So this may be a little bit different for each of the effects of Helium. But for now, let's just browse through these materials and let's take a look and let's add in a material. And just as an example, I will maybe use one of these marble materials and apply it. And you see now my material is applied to my 3D object. And another thing happened. If you paid attention, you see that Helium created now a Helium materials composition. And if we open this up, you see that here are a bunch of JPEGs. These are now all locked and they are all invisible. But if I make them visible, you see that this is actually the material textures that the material uses to create its surface. So whenever you add a material to one of your objects, Helium will create or will add the textures into this composition, and you also have them in your project. So just be aware of it, that you have all of these JPEGs now in your project. The next option that we have is to change the type. That's of course again primitive specific. Then we have of course the size, where you can scale your sphere, and if you take a look here, a close look, then you see that these materials really are very cool. They also have a bump option. They're really detailed and look really good. Then you have the option to change the color, and in this case this has no influence because we have a material that has a color texture, so you will not be able to change anything here. You also have the option to specify a texture, just a simple layer from your timeline as a texture. And here is the motion null. This is now linked to our sphere null, but if you want to create your own null or another one, then you can do it here, or you can create a null here. And then we have these properties. The properties, actually, you can change the tiling of the texture. You see, if I increase this, then this gets smaller. Let's set it to 1 times 1 for now. Then we have the alignment, and the alignment actually changes the anchor point. So you see, if I put it down, then it's on the top and up, and yeah, like that. And then we have these material properties here, and then modify properties, which we will cover a little bit later. But for now, let's set this back to 100, and let's add in another object. To add in other objects, you don't have to go to Effects and Helium and choose this here. You can do that, but it's not necessary. You can just simply click here on this little plus icon, and this will open up our panel that we already saw. Now let's add in another primitive. So let's add in a floor and apply it to my scene. And if I go now to my custom view, you will see, let me quickly dolly out a little bit, that we apply this backdrop floor here. And you also see that it is very huge, and it's already disappearing here in my Helium setting. And I think that this has to do actually with my settings. So if I go to the settings here, there is this clipping. I'm not sure, but I think that it has to do with that. Let me take a look whether this changes anything. Yeah, you see now I corrected this clipping here by just changing the clipping range here. And by the way, if I am here, then I can just explain this. We have a render quality, which you can set to medium and high and higher. And you can set the output to render or to depth. And if you set it to depth, you can then create a depth mat, which you could use with plugins like Frischluft, or you can create depth of field effects. That's really cool. We will probably not cover this in this basic tutorial, but maybe in a future tutorial. So now let's go back to our settings, and let's set it back to render. And let's just leave it at high for the moment. Another little hint, you see that my resolution or my quality is not that good, and this is because I am actually in half resolution. If you're dealing with complex models in Helium and you have problems with the performance in your viewport, then I would recommend to just lower your resolution to half. If you are working at very high resolutions, maybe even further, but this will increase the performance in your viewport tremendously. So you see, if I go to high, then of course everything looks slick, but if I go to half, it's just a little bit of a preview quality here. So now let's just let's just position our floor. And you see here I have this null. This was created to control my floor, so I will just rename it so that I don't get lost. And I will also drag it down here to my sphere. Now let's just position this a little bit better. I will just move it up a little bit. And you see that it is actually really quite huge. So maybe I will just change the settings here a bit, make it a bit smaller, because I don't think that I need it that big. So let's go back to my camera and let's see what we do here. And let's also try to change the position here, bring it down a little bit so that it lines up with my sphere nicely, like so. Okay, so far so good. So now we have a nice backdrop and we have a sphere in our scene. Now let's apply a material to my backdrop. And you probably know already how this works. You click Edit, and then you go to Browse, and then you can change the material. So let's take a look here. I will use this concrete material and apply it. Now I do not like the texture size, so I can go to the properties. And inside the properties, I can change my texture now. So let's go to 2 and 2. This looks way better. Maybe I even go to 2.5 or 2.5 and 2.5, like so. And I think that this looks quite nice. Okay, so far so good. Okay, now I showed you how you can add primitives. Now I want to show you how you can add your own objects. To add your own objects, you again click the plus. And let me mention this, it really doesn't matter on which effect you do this. So you can click these icons here and all of these, and these are more or less these global settings and these global controls for Helium. Now let's go to our tools and browse the tools and select the first one here that used to import 3D models, 3D OBJ models, and apply. Now you see we have a model here. Let's import a model. And in my case, I downloaded some models from Megascans. So let's just import one of these. And you see that now Helium also imported all the assets that it found. So you see that we have textures here now in our Helium folder, and you see we have here a new null, and actually you cannot see the model because it's too small. So let's go in here and let's change its properties. Let's change its size and maybe to 700 or something like that. And now you see here it is. So this is our 3D model. And if I go to the full resolution, then you can see what this looks like. And you see it's quite detailed and looks quite nice. Let's go back to half resolution just to improve our performance. Now let me go to my sphere and just move it a little bit out of the way. And let's choose my null that controls my object here. I will just rearrange these a bit. And you see that it also imported this OBJ here. So these are I don't need them up here, so I will just drag them down. Now let's position this, bring it down to the floor so that it also rests nicely on the floor. Maybe rotate it a tiny bit so that it looks a bit more natural, something like that. And we can now move it over, like so. And maybe rotate it a bit on the y-axis. So let's see how this looks like. Something like that. Maybe bring it forward a little bit. Okay. So now I just have to reposition it a bit. Okay, so this looks fine. Now I have my 3D model in here. Now let's take a look at the options that I have here. You see, now I also can edit this and apply a new material, which I don't want, because actually Helium does a really great job finding and applying the textures. So you just have to make sure that you have an OBJ that already has materials assigned, and it can handle all of these library materials like Megascans, or like there's also a Google library or other 3D marketplaces where you can buy and download different models, and then you can really simply include them and import them into After Effects with all these textures that are already applied. Just make sure that the textures that are required by the OBJ are inside the same folder as the OBJ, because then Helium will be able to find them and import them automatically. If you want to change the settings of your material, so for example, let me quickly change this to higher again. If you do not like the detail or the bump, then you can extract the material, and therefore you need these materials here. So let me show you this. If you want to change the settings of this material, then you have to click this little icon here. This is the extract material button, I think it's called. So be sure that we are on the model and click it. And now you say, oh my God, what have I done? I messed up everything and everything is broken. But let me explain this. So what we did now is we created a material from our object. So this is now a material. And I can just call this wood material so that we know what this is. And because all of my models are above this material, it gets applied automatically to everything in our scene. So this is a very important thing in Helium, the order of operations in your effect stack. So let me just collapse these to make this a bit more obvious. So what we have here is now we have 3 models. So actually I can rename this to my log, whatever it is. So I have my sphere, my floor, and my log, and then I have this material. And because the order of operations in Helium, the material gets applied to all of my elements that are above it. If I use my if I take my floor and drag it beneath it, you see it jumps back to where we were. If I take my sphere and drag it beneath it, you see that it jumps back where we were. So if you add any, for example, a clone or whatever, it will always take into consideration in its calculations all the elements that are above. So it's not really necessary to shift these around. We can actually get back our original materials on our sphere and on our floor by using this button here. So if I click this button here, you see now my sphere turns back to the material that I assigned through the edit. And I can do the same here for the floor. So this is the internal material button. And you can choose either that the material that is applied here has an effect on it, or that the material that you applied through the edit has an effect on this object. So this is this button. Yeah. And now you see that was what I wanted to show you initially. I have access to all of these options. So I have a roughness option where I can then access the texture which is used. I can of course go to my bump settings and crank these up maybe to a crazy value, and you will see this changes the look here quite dramatically. Or I can take it down so that it's more subtle. That looks a little bit boring. Oops. So let's go back here to 60. Let's go back here to my composition. So you see, in this case, or this is the way how you can access material options. And one more thing, if you extract the material, then Helium will add these textures into your timeline directly. So before they were all located in here in this Helium materials composition, pre-comp, but if you extract them, then you see that it adds them to your timeline. It makes it invisible, but they are now here. So you can access them now through these drop downs here. But let's get rid of this material because actually we don't need it. So let's delete it, and you see nothing happens. The material is still also saved within my log 3D model. So let's delete these textures in here because we don't need them in my timeline. Okay, so now we dealt a little bit with materials and with 3D models. And let me show you another thing that you can do. I will go back to my half resolution. If you want to duplicate an object, it's also quite simple. You just go in here, and then you can duplicate it by just selecting it and pressing Ctrl D. Now, the only thing that you have to do now is we can create a new null, because it actually has no control null now. It is still connected to this one here. We can actually rename this log 1. Let's call it log 1. Now let's go to my Helium layer, create a new null, and you see it creates a new null, and we call this log 2. So now let's go to log 1 and copy the position, and copy it, paste it, copy the rotation, just to make life a little bit easier for us. And now, actually this is totally wrong, but I don't care. Oh no, it's right. Okay. So now let's just reposition this and maybe drag our log number 2 here, so that we have something in the foreground here. And I will just rotate it down a bit, so maybe that it sits nicely on my floor. And let's see. Something like that. And now I will just shift it out a little bit so that we have something in the foreground here. Okay, now this is the way how you can duplicate your models in your scene. Let's drag this down here. Now let's take a look at lighting. You see that I have this light here, and this is a point light. And if I move it around, of course, it changes the lighting of our scene. But if you go into your light settings and change this to a spotlight or also a parallel light, then you have a few more options. Oops, sorry. Let me quickly reset the position and the rotation of this. So I will set it to 960 times 540 and 0 here. Now let's go into our point of interest and do the same, 960. And now let's bring it down here so that it is like so. Move it up. Move it up even further and drag it down, and maybe now just move it. Is this the right direction? Yeah, it's the right direction, something like that. So let me set this up so that it also makes sense. This way it's way easier what I want to do. Okay, now I have my light pointing to my asset here. This is what I wanted. Okay. Now with the spotlight you have the option to add shadows, and if we go to my light settings here, pressing AA, and then I can cast shadows, and as soon as I turn this on you see that now I have some nice hard shadows in here. But the lighting still doesn't look that good, and this is where environments come in. So if we go to Helium, and if we take a look at this little sun icon here and click that, this will open up the environment presets. And let's just apply this preset here, and you will see immediately that our lighting changes. So if I go to the full resolution now, you see that this looks way better, and actually it really disturbs me that my log here is somehow floating a little bit in the air. So let's bring it down a tiny bit. That's better. Okay. Now, what does the environment do? The environment is really like an HDRI. So if you are familiar with 3D and with 3D ray traced rendering, then this is lighting a scene with an image. And I can show you this by just turning off quickly our floor. And if we go again to our environment settings, which is this little sundial here, now you can choose either a preset as an environment, as an HDRI, or you can choose a file from your hard drive, your own HDRI, or you can also specify a comp layer in your timeline. Then you can make it visible. So if I click visible and click OK, now you see this image is now lighting our scene. And let me quickly turn off my light so that these two don't interact. And if I now turn around with my camera through this scene, let me again put this to half resolution because then it will be way smoother and way faster. You see that my environment is creating this 360 degrees environment that is actually contributing to the lighting. So let's go back and reset my camera. And let's go back and make my floor visible again. Now we can take a look how we can combine the lights from our After Effects composition together with our environment lights. And therefore we can again go to these settings here, and we have this option that's called shadow effects. So let's turn off the visible now because we don't need this anymore. Shadow effects mean the following. If I set this to high and click OK, you will see that I still have my environment lighting, but it now affects only the areas where my After Effects light is actually contributing light. So if I go in here now and just disable my environment light for a moment, disable it, you will see that it changes. But you also see that it affects only the areas where my After Effects light is actually lighting. And this is pretty cool because this way you can really create nice lighting effects. So now for this example, let's set this to medium, then the effect is not quite so harsh, but it looks really interesting. Now, one more thing that I want to show you. Let's go to the Helium, let's go to the sphere. And let's edit it and change it to another material. So browse the material, and this is also related to this environment stuff. So if I choose one of these mirror surfaces and apply it to my sphere, you see that my environment is actually also reflecting in mirror surfaces. So you can see now that the environment of my room is now reflecting here in my sphere, which looks really cool. So also these mirror surfaces are possible to create with Helium. Okay, now let me show you another very funny thing, and this is creating animated titles. So to create an animated title in Helium, again we click this little plus icon, and then we scroll down to our Extrude effects. These are presets that we can use, and we can browse all of them by going into this collection here. Let's take a look what we want. You see we have different options. There are different animation presets. There are different extrusion and bevel presets. And just as a starting point, I will use maybe this one here and apply it to my scene. And now if I scroll through my timeline, you see that this animates in, so I can create a quick run preview, and you see that now I have this helium text visible here. So let's just move this up a little bit so that it is above my elements right here. Move it maybe back and set a little bit. Let's do it here with the null. So this is actually the text null that was created. And here I can change the position, so I will just move it back a little bit. Let me change this back to half resolution, because then it will be way more responsive, like so. Okay, and maybe a little bit higher again, like that. Cool. And you also have a text layer, and here of course you can change everything that you are used to change. You can change to another font. You can of course change your font to maybe a thin font, and you see that this will update immediately. So you can change the font, the size and everything. And you can of course also type in your own title. And you also can change the appearance here. So if we take a look at the extrude that was created down here, we have the options to first of all change the depth. So this is the extrusion. If I set this to 200, then you will see that this gets way thicker. I can change the bevel and set this to 200, and you see it gets way thicker. But I also can change the bevel profile, and I can do this by clicking this edit button again. And you see now I have the option to change between different extrude profiles. If you take a look here, a close look, you see that we have different extrude options here. This one looks pretty cool. And you can also, so let's apply this one here, and you can also change the material, and you can scroll down here now and apply material. So let's browse these materials here, and maybe, don't know what we take. We could take something plastic or stone, or do we have wood? Let's take a metal for now, something like maybe this one, this slightly crunchy old metal here. And this is a little bit off, so we can now go to our properties here and change its repetition. So maybe 3 and 3, 3.5 here, and change the full resolution to see what it does. Whoops, now I put in 35, which actually creates this brushed look. Doesn't look too bad, but this was not on purpose. So 3.5, yeah, something like that. Now you see we have a really nice texture, metal texture here on our text. I can again come in here and change the animation preset. So here you see that we have different presets for the animation. So if we want to our letters to fall in from the top, then we can apply this, and this will then of course animate, as you can see. And you can also change the timing here, so the duration of your animation. You can increase this here, for example, to 200, then the animation duration will be longer, of course. And let me go back here and change this to half resolution, because then we have a way faster preview. And you see that all of this renders quite fast. So we have more or less global illumination, we have bump maps, we have reflections, we have lights, we have shadows. And you see that it is really responsive and working quite nicely. So Helium is really strong regarding quick 3D setups. And this is really the power of this plugin, that you can create quick 3D setups without having to dial in many different properties and parameters. Okay, so far so good. Now there's one more thing in this tutorial that I want to show you, and this is how you can combine different Helium 3D setups. So let me show you this before I confuse you. Let's create a new composition for that, and let's call this my grass composition, and let's apply a new solid and call this Helium grass. And again, I will start by creating a Helium add effects. And in this case, I want to import one of my models. So I will use this 3D OBJ importer and import a model. Import this OBJ. You see it's a little bit small. So let's go to my grass properties and make it bigger, like 200. And now we want to clone this. I want to create a little bit of field of grass here. So if you want to use a cloner, there's one thing that you have to keep in mind. If you want to clone something, make sure that your object is not in the center of your composition, but in the 0, 0 position. So let's do that by just clicking on our null, going to position and set it to 0 and 0. If you don't do this, it may mess up your anchor points and you may have difficulties handling your cloner later on. But with this trick, you can just move it to 0, 0, 0, which is actually the up left corner in After Effects. And yeah, this is how you do it. And now we add a cloner effect, and therefore we click the plus again, and now we go to our cloners and browse these. And for this, I want to use this fill cloner. So let's apply this. And now if I go to my custom view, you see what we have here. So you see that we have a bunch of primitives, and these were created by the preset. But we also have my model. So if I increase the size here, you will see it, that both of them get actually cloned. And this was what I was talking before about the order of operations. So if you have all these primitives here above our cloner, so for example, I could now duplicate this primitive and set it to spheres and make huge spheres, and these would get cloned too. So everything that is above my fill cloner, which is this effect here, will get cloned. If I drag it beneath it, then you see it will not have an influence on my primitive. So let's delete this, and let's also delete these primitives because we actually don't need this. And what I have now is a nice field, let me change this to full resolution, of 3D grass, which is really cool. It's a little bit too big now though, so let's scale it down a bit, maybe 250, something like that. And it's probably also a little bit too big, so let's make it, I don't know, width 1500 and 1500, something like that, a little bit smaller. And we can add a little bit of angular randomness here, so then it looks a little bit better, something like that. Okay, now I want to actually import this setup here that I have here in this composition to my main Helium composition. So how can I do that? I will show you this now. Therefore, again, we go to our initial Helium layer and we click one of the plus signs here, doesn't matter which one. And we go to our tools and browse the tools. And here you have this option that is called Helium, add Helium setup from another layer or comp. And this is exactly what we need. So you just apply this. What I did not do yet, what I have to do, of course, is that I have to import my grass composition into this main composition, make it invisible. Now go back to my layer Helium comp that I just added in here and choose the layer. And here I just choose the grass. And you see immediately now I have my grass in here. So to create a null to control this now, I can just create click null. But if I do this, you see everything disappears. And this is again a little problem with the anchor points. So I have a null here now, which controls my grass, but my grass is somewhere. So let's not do it that way. Let's do it in another way, the right way. And the right way is that you go to your grass composition. And here you have this cloner null. And you set the cloner null position also to 0 and 0. And then we go back here to our Helium main composition. And if we go in here now and click, not on the log, but on our Helium comp, create null. Now you see that we have this null, which is our grass that I can rename now. And now it is really in the middle of our comp and I can easily position it wherever I want it. So let's position it right here so that they are nicely stuck to our ground. And let's move them forward a little bit so that we have some 3D grass inside After Effects. And you see we have shadows and all this good stuff. Really cool. Okay, so this is it with this basic introduction into Helium. I would really recommend that you check out this plugin and that you play with all of these options that you have here. Check out all the presets, just play around with it. I hope that you got a little bit of a basic insight how this works. I thank you very much for watching and I really hope to see you soon. Goodbye.